Okay. You want me to push it for you?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. One of the unique things about mission-based organizations or nonprofits is the number of stakeholders involved. This is what makes them really unique. In addition to staff, nonprofit organizations have boards of directors, they have funders, partners, legislators, and often they belong to a coalition. And the list can go on and on. And working or managing these stakeholders can be overwhelming for a leader. So today, excuse me, on Coffee Time with Masterminds, we are going to be talking about stakeholders and what it takes to manage all of these relationships, especially during these times. So, welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. It's a 30-minute conversation with leaders of mission-based organizations. My name is Cynthia Rojas, and I am the founder and principal of To Your Growth. If you're joining us, please let us know that you're here by putting your name and where you're from in the chat box. We love to hear what people are chiming in from. So please join us and let us know that you're here. I am also joined by my co-host, Rebecca Tuttle. Rebecca, how are you?
I'm good. I'm here, everyone. How are you this morning? I'm Rebecca Tuttle, and I'm the founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
Awesome. And we have our other co-host, Peter Blakely.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
You are Peter Blakely from Blakely.
It's Friday here. Can you tell we're ready for the holidays? I'm Peter Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
This is live. What do you mean?
I love it.
Myra's with us today.
Yay, Myra.
Good morning, Myra.
Myra. Oh, man. This is funny. I can't pronounce my words today, so I'm having some technical difficulty around here. So, okay. This is a hot topic for a few reasons. One, in our work as consultants, we often come in contact with organizations' stakeholders, right? I see it in my work all the time. I'm sure Rebecca and Peter can talk about their work and how stakeholders play a role in that. And it's been interesting for me to experience how the relationship between the stakeholder and the organization impacts or spills over into my relationship with the organization. And so I don't know if leaders are aware that these relationships, one, are really important, but they are also influencing other relationships. So I'm interested, Peter, let me start with you. Do you find this in your work?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, let me start with one of the most common scenarios that people ask me about, which is that they've performed an evaluation study and now they're presenting their findings. And this happens when people are internal evaluation staff or external evaluation. They present a set of findings and then they get a whole lot of resistance about those findings. The methods weren't right. You didn't measure the right things. We don't have confidence in how you've done this calculation. And as a result, the core message just gets lost and not utilized. And I think that one of the reasons that happens is failure to engage the right stakeholders early enough in the process. No evaluation is ever perfect or indisputable. So it's about building incremental agreement as you're going through about the proxies that you're using and the methods that you're using and what you're measuring at all, which is a huge one, right? And I think that question of what we're measuring at all is where it comes back to strategy. And I often find there's confusion about coming up with good performance metrics because there's internal confusion about what the organization is doing and how. You probably see that when you're doing strategy work, and probably you too, Rebecca, when you're doing development work and you're asking yourselves, like, is this a good funding source for us?
Right.
You know,
One of the things I hear
go
all
ahead,
the time is, well, everyone else is going after this money. Why can't we too? Well, does it make sense for us? I don't know. It's okay. It's okay not to go after everything that's funding, that is funding related. And you kind of hurt yourself when you do that too, because it might not be a right fit, but you went after it anyway, and then you got denied. So you're right, Peter. It happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, it's worse to put in the energy. I don't know which is worse, to put in the energy on a grant and get denied, which is not a great use of your resources and not a great use of your staff's enthusiasm and energy for the work. Or is it worse to actually get funding that's not really a right fit for your organization? And that can really lead to some confusion and mission creep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Peter, something you mentioned before, I think also recognizing that your staff are also stakeholders, right? So in the example that you gave where people could you could do an evaluation and then people sit back and they're like, oh no, this is not right. This is not accurate. And it could also come from the very people who are working in the program. And
It
that
often
they
does.
are stakeholders. Yep.
There's a lot of fear with evaluation. I think people think of it as we're getting a report card and we're going to pass or fail and we're going to look bad, and obviously they want to put themselves in the correct light. So it's very, very important when you're starting an evaluation to understand the difference between evaluating your program and your staff. Right? We're not asking ourselves here, are you doing your job? We're asking ourselves, are we as an organization creating the right results in the world? And then what are we going to do about it? I think there's a lot of concern that if the results aren't positive or we're not causing the change that we want to see in the world, that individuals are going to be blamed. And I think you have to be very, very clear early on. This is an evaluation of the program and of our logic model and of the utilization of our resources. It's not an evaluation of you as a worker. And obviously nobody is questioning the dedication of the staff to the project. It should be about best leveraging the dedication of the staff to the project, right? So if we can all agree that we're all on the same page, and if we can all agree that we're solving this problem and working as hard as we can to solve this problem, and we come up with some data that says we're not quite there yet, then we should be able to have a really constructive and useful conversation about that.
Yes, absolutely. I think board members are also stakeholders, and the relationship between board members and the executive director or board members in the organization is important and really needs really intentional relationship building so that board members and EDs and their staff can come together and really work and ensure that the organization is doing what it's meant to do. And one thing I see often is EDs will tell me, well, my board members don't really know what we do, and I'm not sure their input is valuable. And I often tell them, but that's your responsibility, right? Many
Right.
times we become board members because we have a passion for the mission, but we may not know what the organization does.
In some weeks past, we were talking about how important it is to vet your board members and also give them orientation. And a lot of times organizations fall short in that orientation. And so it's easy to say, well, they aren't really participatory, or, they kind of just come when we have meetings. But a lot of that onus of engagement falls upon the organization as well. And they're there for a reason to help. So let's maximize their ability to do that by giving them information they need so they can help.
And another thing that I see in organizations is boards over-helping, and they want so badly to do things and come up with ideas that are useful to the organization, but they can start popcorning up ideas that the staff doesn't have capacity to carry out. And I think that really good strategy mapping can help with that and providing them with a lot more information. Maybe, Cynthia, you have some techniques that can help.
Yeah, I mean, and I see it all the time, right? And I love, what did you call it, Peter? Over-helping?
Overhelping, yeah.
No, I thought
Yeah.
you said you were throwing popcorn.
Yeah. Over helping Baba eating popcorn. That's but no, I see it all the time when we do strategic planning or we do any kind of planning with an organization. Board members have the potential to kind of detour the work, much like what Rebecca is saying, where they may not, well intended, but they may not know the nuances of the work, and so they bring their expertise, but sometimes it detours, or they're giving ideas where staff just don't have the capacity or the organization doesn't have the infrastructure, especially if you have board members that work in the private sector and have little experience in the nonprofit sector. But that's a relationship that really needs some intentional relationship building. It really, really does. And I'm not sure I see that a lot. Do you guys?
I think part of that is from an intimidation, because there are a lot of organizations that I've worked for and consulted with that they'll look for doctors and lawyers and people in more prominent roles to serve on their board. And they do that because it makes their board look better to have those intellects on their board. But I don't think they're tapping into, other than having a person there in a high position, what else do they bring to that role? Because there's a reason they wanted to be there. There's a reason they wanted to sit there with you, is to learn more about the work that you do. Their mission resonates with you, but how can you tap into conversation with them, keeping them informed of your work, so you can break down some of those barriers, so they're not just sitting there like a pretty face, right? And I mean this with the utmost respect. This is a challenge that I have seen over and over again in organizations that I've worked in and I've worked with.
And board members don't want to be underutilized.
Right.
They have volunteered for this because they feel strongly about the mission and they want to feel connected and useful.
Yep.
So it sounds like this is about providing them the right level of information.
Yeah. I think another underutilized stakeholder is your legislator.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen nonprofits really build tight or really deep relationships with their local legislators or state legislators. And remember that when there is funding coming down from the feds, it is these folks who can advocate for that funding to come into your state and therefore trickle down to your nonprofit organization. It is imperative that your legislator knows that you exist. And so I've seen it with organizations that really focus on building that relationship, and I've seen the outcome and it's beautiful. And then I've seen it where no one ever reaches out to their legislator unless they're in trouble. And that's not the only time you should reach out to the legislator. Yeah. Yeah. Do you guys see that as well?
Yeah, I've worked with some organizations that have been very effective in building coalition with their elected representatives.
Yeah.
And that kind of alignment of not-for-profit and government is much more powerful than either of them working independently.
Yeah.
I teach us a lot in my intro to federal grant writing course, because they are the ones in Congress and our legislature at the state, even our municipalities, that are advocating on behalf of funding when it's faced with cuts. And if they don't know about our organization and our mission and how we help the community, how can they advocate to save and preserve those dollars when they have to make tough calls? And they'll remember us and pass along opportunities for our organizations to receive funding or be part of it, because that doesn't just help the community, but that also helps them, so they can go back and say, this is what we're doing in our community, and feel confident that that's actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I see it. I saw it recently, with refugee resettlement organizations. For some reason, I've been talking to a lot of them recently, and that's such an important issue, right? Getting the new members that are coming to our country settled and getting them acclimated into this new culture. And there's a lot of important work that happens with those organizations. But our elected officials definitely need to know that you exist and yet you're doing this important work, because there's a lot of federal funding, potential funding, that comes down from the feds to support these nonprofits. So that's an example I've seen
Well,
recently.
yeah, I think particularly in the incoming administration. If
I
it's
just I
somewhat
want
modeled after the Obama era, I think that is something to be looking out for sure.
Yes.
to welcome. We have a lot of viewers joining us today, and I before we keep going a little longer,
Yeah.
Thaddeus is with us today. Welcome,
Hi,
Thaddeus. Can't wait to have you on. We also have Papa Ada Sek, I believe if I'm mispronouncing, and Dalton Garrett. And Dalton is from CEHSID Incorporated. So we have some new viewers today. This is great.
Yeah.
Great.
Welcome,
Good to see you.
everyone. Yeah.
Everybody, please put your questions and comments in the chat too.
That's wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. Are we missing any other stakeholders? That would be good to hear from our audience. What other stakeholders do nonprofits need to focus on?
Well, the community.
Love that.
Did we talk about either the community, well, both the community that is using your services, but also the community that's not using your services? Those are very important stakeholder groups. They are resources for best practices. They are who you should be piloting new initiatives with and getting feedback from. They're also your best recruiters. You know, if you offer a class or something, a service that people need to come to, those are the people who are going to get the word out in the community for you. So building credibility with that group is super vital.
And, I wonder, how do you tap into people who don't use your services but need it? And that's the perspective that's really, really instrumental, and yet can be challenging to find. But I love it. You're right. The community is your stakeholder. Rebecca, she's managing our chat and comments.
She's got a lot going on. Here's a great example about like another stakeholder that you might not have thought about was, a program that wanted to recruit adults with who needed to learn English as a second language in their neighborhood. And this is a population that's a little bit hard to reach. They might have low levels of literacy in any language, and they might have kind of a distrust of certain systems. And so this program ended up finding youth at a community center, and they talked to the young people about the program. And the youth said, okay, if you come and bring us the information, we will enroll our mothers, right? Because the elders might not have a level of trust. The young people who are more adept at managing systems and had a better feel of who to trust in what settings in the United States, they could build that credibility, and then they could bring the materials home and bring that resource. So here was another stakeholder that's not even directly in the mix, who turned out to be vitally important to the success of the program.
I love that. You're so right.
One of the best ways to engage the community stakeholders, or even the community in general, is just get out there. I call it boots on the ground. Knock on the doors, go to the community convening, go to the meetings, and don't show up as the suit. We are all equal when we are engaging communities. And that's another thing. If you are inviting your legislators to come to your events or speak even virtually, you have to make sure that you have lay people in the conversation as well, or you're just interviewing a legislator, right? So that's really important. And funders want other people there. They want to see other people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And Rebecca, you always mention building relationships with your funders, right? That's a primary stakeholder that you always talk about, and how important that is. And not just talk to them when there's a grant coming up, but update them and pick up the phone and chat with them. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So when we're engaging our stakeholders, we want to make sure that, again, like you said, Cynthia, it's not just when we're asking for money, because if you're constantly being asked for money, is that someone you're building a relationship with, or are you just using them as an ATM, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And when we are keeping our philanthropists informed of our work, it isn't also to send postcards or mailing campaigns to ask them for more money in just a different way. It's, here's a compelling story that, right from the voice of our family we worked with, that your support as the philanthropist made a difference in their life. I thought it would be nice to pass that along. Or if you have changes to your application throughout, maybe your measures aren't measuring as you had anticipated, you want to reach out and have that communication with them as well. It's showing the philanthropist and the funder that you're responsible managing the grants, that you really are working toward the impact you're trying to make, and you're not just reaching out because you need something from them. You want to say, thank you so much for doing this, investing. Here's the difference it's making.
That's something I always stress with my client organizations about working with their metrics. Don't wait until the end of the year and fill in an annual report and just send it off to your funder and treat it like a report card. Keep an eye on your metrics and then reach out to them. Like they're not just grading you with this. They also want to run successful programs. So if you haven't enrolled as many people as you thought you would, call them up and have a conversation about it and let them help you brainstorm enrolling more people, or, talk about some different ideas. Should we expand this way or that way, go to a different region, that kind of thing. Talk about it early on. Don't surprise them at the end with less good data, right? I mean, the purpose of this information is for everybody to be building the strongest possible program. So never wait, right? The sooner you can look at it and the more people you can have look at it, the better.
Yeah.
Dalton has a comment. If I could put it up, is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Dalton says, this is helpful for us as we are the Center for the Elimination of Health and Social Inequities and Disparities Incorporated. We assist health centers, hospitals, providers, and other NPOs reach high-risk populations for chronic and infectious disease across Massachusetts. Funding is always one of the major challenges. Even though we fundraise, we found many funders want to know what and how many community partners you're collaborating with. Absolutely. And you don't want to keep that a secret either. That's a great point, Dalton. Thank you for sharing. And
there's so many vulnerable communities, so many vulnerable populations that might also be at high risk for negative health outcomes. Some of those relationships are legitimately hard to build. And so you want to be working with organizations that have already built and developed trust in those areas.
And as you build those relationships with other providers in the community, they can help offer assistance in areas that your organization may not be able to. And so that way the client isn't going without. They actually have support from a multitude of stakeholders. And when you can show a funder how you're working with other entities in your community, that's really favorable for funding.
Partnerships are key with nonprofits. Nonprofits do the work of changing people's lives, right? And whether that's even indirectly through the environment or directly by helping with basic needs. And this work is really important, and no one can do it alone, and nor should they. And I was talking to someone the other day who was talking about how burdensome funders can be in terms of their asks about outcomes and impact and data. And what I was hearing was that this person didn't see their funder as a partner in this work, and they are our partners. And that, Rebecca, I love when you remind us of that over and over again. These are our partners. The same way our staff are our partners. We are doing this wonderful, amazing, life-changing work in partnership. We're not doing it in isolation.
Yeah. I'd say we've been at this for a few hundred years. So all the easy problems have already been solved, right? If you're still doing this today, it's hard, complicated work. and you need to bring in all of your allies and use all of your resources. Nobody is expecting any one organization to solve a problem all by themselves, right? So all we can do is share information, work in partnership, and build bridges to move the dial, to move forward on these issues.
I love that. Build bridges.
You hit the nail on the head. Yeah, but you hit the nail on the head though, Peter. That's the difference between population accountability and program accountability. And you know, that is results accountability. So I love that connection, that analogy there.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that word, results-based accountability.
I love it too.
Dalton says diversifying your partners across academic, community, industrial, legislative, and grassroots or innovative agencies increases potential. Absolutely.
That is such a helpful list of some of the types of organizations to be thinking about, you know, because they each have very specific strengths. And I don't think any organization could be good at what all of those organizations could potentially do together.
Yeah. I think we should have Dalton on the show.
I think that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, I think that understanding or talking to someone who does that well and understands the importance of the depth of these relationships, I think can give us some really great ideas. Uh-oh. Am I echoing?
No.
Okay.
I don't hear it.
Cool. Yeah. So we definitely need to bring someone on that does this work and does it well.
And bring out some interesting models.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is, you know, this is a hard conversation. It's a very hard conversation to try and address in just half an hour. I think that we could talk about working with stakeholders about every single other thing that we talk about on this show. We've done a pretty good job here today of lifting up some of the key stakeholders and some of the importances. But I think it would be really helpful to talk about models that have worked.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So let us know in the chat if there are people we should bring on the show and talk about great models.
And the definition of states, like it means something different to each organization and which stakeholder and what the most sense. And one of the things I do with my student clients is make a list of key stakeholders. But first and has the people you serve. So if you work with parents, adults, at the top, list them at, and oftentimes they're left the list because we just don't know about it. But make a list. Who are your stakeholders, and are you using the opportunity there to engage them and fully in work, and vice versa. And it's really eye-opening when you do that exercise.
But Becca, you were coming in and out. I don't know if that's my internet or yours. Peter, did you experience that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rebecca's a little blurry. It's Friday.
That's okay though.
Am I right?
Yeah, we got the gist of it.
Yeah,
and I do think actually having a process for figuring out who should be at the table is just such an eye-opening possibility. And I've seen organizations go too far where they're including everybody, but they're not really clear about why those people are at the table. I've seen organizations be too narrow about who they include and who's at the table, or bringing people in too late so that people feel like blindsided by decisions that have already been made. So I think actually having a system would be incredibly useful. And I think, what Rebecca's suggesting is, really great.
Yeah, we call it relationship mapping. I think also putting a column or, wherever you make your list, that reads value. What's the value that partnership brings, I think is also important, so that you always remember, like, what's the value that your staff brings? What's the value that a legislator brings when
And
you do
ask
your
them too.
Yeah.
It's really important to ask them, because we don't want to ever make assumptions, especially now. We're finding out how disastrous assumptions are, right? We suspected it before, but don't make assumptions.
Productive when you're engaging somebody to be able to communicate to them, here's the value that I think you bring, and here's what we need from you at this table.
Yeah.
And that can avoid a lot of floundering and overstepping, and people can right size their engagement when they understand their role.
Yeah, I think I get confused sometimes when I get asked to participate either as a board member or in an advisory board, and I'm not sure what's the value I bring to them. So you're right. We are at the 30-minute mark. Rebecca, we have Michael Thomas.
Nice to see you, Michael.
Thanks for joining. Great topic. Continued success, Peter, with your future sessions. Thank you for joining us, Michael. And Dalton's leaving his contact information, so
all right, we will reach out.
I love it. Thank you, Dalton.
Thank you, Dalton.
Thank you. All right, guys. Well, this has been an amazing 30 minutes. We can talk about stakeholders forever, but we realize that you are also out there doing the work of changing people's lives. So we're going to end our show and see, do we have any takeaways? Rebecca, quick takeaway.
I'm bringing popcorn next time, that's for sure.
Peter, takeaways. Oh, Rebecca, go ahead.
On a serious note, my takeaway is just reach out to your stakeholders and get to know them. Build authentic relationships with them, and they will be more helpful, and vice versa, if you do that, instead of just making those assumptions. Yeah. And popcorn, always.
Yeah. And popcorn. And I think my big takeaway is your org. Think of these as important organizational relationships, and nurture and tend them the same way you do your personal relationships. Don't just go to people when you have an ask, but make sure that you're bringing them along and that they see themselves as part of a movement with you.
Yes, yes. And, my great takeaway is that we talk a lot about what leaders should do, and we know that these are hard times and that there's a lot of work needing to be done because we've had to uproot our way of doing things. But really, as leaders, it is your job to manage and sustain these relationships. And I hope that we've given you some insight, if you're not doing that right now, of why this is important. And if you are doing it, kudos to you. Kudos to you. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Bye.